Thank you, Asha, and thank you to everyone at the World Affairs Seminar for the invitation to speak with you all today. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or good late evening to the delegates, wherever you may be. My name is Kevin Miyazaki, and I'm here with Mary Louise Schumacher to talk about This is Milwaukee today. And I'm just going to make sure, okay, there we go. Just as a way of explaining geography, Mary Louise and I are based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the upper Midwest of the US. Milwaukee is located on the eastern end of Wisconsin and on the shores of Lake Michigan, which is the fifth largest freshwater lake in the world. So the upper Midwest. And the project This is Milwaukee was based around the city and the slight outlying layers around Milwaukee. We'd like to acknowledge the ancestral land from where we're coming to you from today. I'm at my home in Wauwatosa, and Mary Louise is traveling. She's in New York City.
Great.
Oh, and we're just going to begin by we're going to be talking about This is Milwaukee, and it's an interview project with Milwaukeeans discussing democracy and citizenship. So we thought we'd begin today to show you guys a compilation of the project of some of the people we interviewed and their thoughts to fully understand where we're coming from, and then we'll spend the time today talking about the process and our experience.
Has there been a thin veneer over this entire thing for as long as I know, and it's just now starting to crack? Has it ever been what I thought it was? Has this idea of democracy ever existed in the way that we collectively thought it did? Or have we just now gotten to a point where we're starting to see through the cracks?
I am on a fair day optimistic of the future of this country because I have the unique opportunity to be around young people. And a lot of them, and I say that with all my emotions, I meet some of them and they transform my lack of optimism into something very optimistic.
I want leaders who are not trying to maintain any kind of status quo. I want people who have their eyes wide open and are willing to engage, authentically engage every possible group that can be brought together.
Democracy is about voice, and it's about the collective voice of the folks that are being led. Pure democracy, a democracy that works, actually responds to the voice and actually sets up systems that are fair to hear all voices, including voices of dissent from your own opinion.
I get real emotional about seeing people suffer because there's no reason for suffering in a country that's supposed to be the home of the brave and the land of the free. We're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, and yet we don't act like it because we got so many have-nots because the haves are so greedy.
The way I live democracy is to lead by example. And I think that's always something that I've tried to do. I'm a very type A person, and some people have called me bossy before, but when I have an opinion or I want to change something, I'm going to do it too. I'm going to lead by example, and I'm going to show that anybody can, be a part of this change.
Just when I started thinking about it right away, I got emotional. It just came up so quickly because I work all the time now in political innovation, but I don't ask myself every day, what is democracy to me? But just in that moment, it made me emotional. It made me come back to something that I think all the time, which is that democracy is at risk.
Great. Well, everyone, it's so lovely to be with you today. And, Kevin and I talked about this talk this morning, and we have sort of decided that we're going to talk with all of you the the way that we would go into people's homes and into people's studios and talk about this project, which is really a conversation and fairly informal. So first of all, what we call our project as shorthand is an exploration of democracy and citizenship. And you probably know that the last few years in the United States have been a very consequential time. But there's an origin story to our project, and that's sort of where we want to begin. And it really begins with Kevin. So as Asha mentioned in her introduction, Kevin has been making collections of portraits of people, communities really, in the Midwest for many years. And it really started in a really interesting way in 2011. So the governor of our state, then Governor Scott Walker, introduced a bill that would essentially eliminate or greatly curtail collective bargaining rights for public workers like school teachers. And what that means is that school teachers couldn't kind of organize to be in unions to negotiate for their benefits and their rights and their pay. And what happened was people started protesting at the capital of our state, Madison, Wisconsin. People came from all over the state by the hundreds and thousands, actually. And there were news reports about this that literally went around the world. People saw these news reports in Egypt and Europe and everywhere. And there was a response about this story from all over the world. But many of these news reports, including the ones that were local, those that were national, were sort of oversimplified. And this is something that Kevin observed, that the cameras went in for the most dramatic, the most kind of extreme or performative aspects of the story. So they'd always focus on kind of the drum circle in the middle of the protests. But there were so many people there that Kevin really had this question, who are these people really? Like, I'd like to find out. And so as a photographer, he was very resourceful and devised a makeshift kind of photo booth, photo studio out of PVC pipe, which is like big plastic pipe, and a single sheet of black fabric. And it's very lightweight, something he can throw in the back of his car. And he just drove to Madison, which is 90 minutes away from where we live in Milwaukee, and went to the protests and invited people one at a time to come out of this giant scene and to be photographed kind of independently of all of that. And what I really love about these photographs is that while you can't see all the ruckus, like the big protests, you really get the energy. It was very cold at the time. You got people's homemade signs. You really got a sense of the event by looking at these individuals. And then by putting all of the pictures together, like Kevin has done here on the screen, you begin to get a sense of the more nuanced picture of what was going on at the Capitol. So after that project, Kevin started experimenting with that practice in other ways. He, for example, decided to drive the entire perimeter of Lake Michigan, which he showed you at the top of our talk, which is, how many miles is that, Kevin, exactly?
I think it's 1,400.
Yeah, and 2 weeks it took you to do that, right?
2 weeks, yeah.
So he spent 2 weeks literally driving around the perimeter of the lake and finding people who either work close to the water's edge or live near there or play near there. So these were swimmers and scientists and fishermen and various folks who, for one reason or another, exist close to the edge of the lake. And what ultimately results is these really beautiful individual portraits, but then you also get a picture of this place, the Great Lake and Lake Michigan, and the kind of people that gather around it. He also did a project about tourists in the Wisconsin Dells, which is a very popular tourist site in Wisconsin, and a group of artists in Milwaukee as well. So this was something Kevin had been doing for quite a while. So fast forward to March of 2019 and the announcement that the Democratic National Convention was going to come to Milwaukee. So this is a really important political moment when the Democratic Party, one of the two major parties in the United States, would come together and decide who would be its nominee for the presidential election. And it's the time when the party makes its case for itself, when a lot of things are sort of set into motion. And the city where we live was, I have to say, it's a long time ago now, it's hard to even remember this, but the city of Milwaukee was really jubilant about this get. I mean, the cities compete to have the DNC come to their city, and we won. It means that tens of thousands of visitors will come. It means economic impact. It means that people were opening new restaurants. There were public art projects. Hotels were being kind of rushed to completion. So there's all of this energy and excitement. And the mayor of our city, Tom Barrett, loved to talk about how there will be more journalists in Milwaukee for this one couple of days than have ever been in our city in the whole of its history. Which you might imagine got Kevin thinking again, like, well, how is our story going to be told by all of these outsiders? And for those of you who don't know Milwaukee well, there are a lot of kind of cliches that go along with living in a Midwest city in the US. We're associated with beer. Beer has been brewed here for many generations, and bratwursts, and old TV shows that none of you probably have ever seen called Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. There are also a lot of negative things about Milwaukee that tend to be kind of in the headlines a lot. So Milwaukee is a city that is known for being among the most racially and economically segregated in all of the United States. It's been called one of the worst places to raise a Black child in our country. It has one of the worst incarceration rates for Black men in the entire world. So there are all of these kind of negative superlatives that are also very important, but also kind of flattening, that are not the whole picture of our city. And so Kevin, who grew up in Milwaukee, spent a little bit of time away, but came back and made a really conscious decision to live in Milwaukee, really thought about presenting a more complicated picture, especially just like a diverse range of everyday people who make our city remarkable and beloved, if also extremely challenged. So this is when he started thinking about making a broader project about his hometown and titled it, This is Milwaukee.
Yeah, and I think, in the beginning, the idea, the title, This is Milwaukee, was, again, this very outward looking notion. Like, how would the world, focusing on Milwaukee, how would they see us, right? And one of the things that I know from living here in Milwaukee is it's a very diverse place, but that doesn't always come through in certain ways. Again, this sort of German beer and bratwurst history, it's very easy to sort of sum in certain ways. And so the idea that I had was to create this really diverse set of pictures, or pictures representing a diverse community that I knew was here. But those pictures are still just pictures. They're just a two-dimensional representation of a community. And I knew the project needed to have deeper meaning and more content to it. And so Mary Louise and I have known each other for about 20 years and worked every once in a while on small little things together. But she agreed to come onto the project, thankfully. And she had just finished this Harvard Nieman Fellowship, which is an amazing thing, a very high stature position for a journalist. It's a year at Harvard University to basically study what you want to study, take classes at Harvard and be in a cohort with journalists from all over the world. And so Mary Louise had studied many things there, but one of the things that she was interested in was public engagement in journalism. And so this kind of was good timing. I think it kind of it matched where I was at and where Mary Louise was at. So thankfully she agreed to come onto the project and to create really what the whole project became, which is this thought process of Milwaukeeans, right? The thoughts and the feelings of people who live here through their voices.
Yeah, and in the beginning, as Kevin said, we were so interested in sort of that outside perception of Milwaukee. And as you'll learn as we're talking, you'll see that changed over time and really became about a project that was for Milwaukee as much as anybody else. And I would say if we could describe what we were trying to accomplish in the very beginning, we were really interested in what we would learn from Milwaukeeans and what Milwaukee could contribute to the national conversation about the country, which again, just felt so consequential at the time, controversial too, actually. Another goal was to reclaim a bit of space for people online, to create a hybrid of journalism and art that just slowed people down a little bit, if even for a minute, to create something that would kind of cut through the noise of some of the horse race journalism that's about who's winning today and who isn't, and kind of the noise of the internet, to just provide something that was very intimate and arresting, and hopefully inspire people to think about democracy in kind of a personal way. You want to talk about
So
yeah.
so we had, I don't know if we even had a number of people in mind when we started, how many people we would be able to interview and photograph and include in the project. But we both been working in the city for about 20 years, and we had knowledge of people doing things. Milwaukee is both a big city and sort of a small town in a lot of ways. And we had sort of a basic list, I think, of the people that we knew from their work in the city. We had people we knew from personal relationships, and we started to build this big list. But that's a challenge, you know, because we had a lot of names written down. But the goal was that we would find and spotlight people that were contributing to the public life of the city. And that could be in very large ways. It could be in very, very small ways. So it might be people that are recognizable. The mayor is a subject in our project, but many people are not recognizable by the average Milwaukeean. They're everyday citizens who are doing good things in their neighborhood or in their church or in their school. And so we ended up, I think, with over 300 names on a list, and we winnowed it down to about 100. We also, every time we asked or interviewed somebody, we asked them to recommend other people for the project, which then created this sort of like growing concentric circle, right, of people, of fascinating people that we didn't know, who we would reach out to and meet. And we also asked people, which was a tough thing, we asked people to recommend others for the project who maybe thought differently than they did politically, that were maybe on opposite sides of the fence from them, but they still respected their contributions to the city. And that was a bit of a challenge. It wasn't always easy for people to think of those people to recommend. But in the end, we ended up with pastors and school children, philanthropists, teachers, refugee advocates, journalists, restaurant owners, artists, community gardeners, neighbors, activists, caregivers, and the list really goes on. It's a really interesting and kind of diverse group of people by every metric that you can think of. And if you visit the website, you'll get a feeling for that. And that was, you know, one of our main goals was to outwardly show the world these kind of great everyday people that lived in our city. So the photographs, Mary Louise and I worked together on this for 19 months. It wasn't intended to be that long, but because of the coronavirus, things got stretched out. But the project was supposed to end at the Democratic National Convention in July of 2020, which then was postponed and then canceled. But the process basically was that we would go meet with people and both photograph them and interview them. I stuck to the same sort of process that I was used to, this black backdrop. And all the portraits are in black and white. And that's an intentional thing in order to really create this neutral ground for the photographs. Everyone's treated very equally visually, the same lighting, the same background. And so it's sort of, I guess from a visual point of view, I feel like it's this very democratic process of photographing people. There's a structure and a system to it. We ask people to be quite serious in the pictures, which is a little bit hard sometimes. Some people have big smiles when they photograph, but we're asking them pretty serious questions. And so when the photographs appear on the website or in print, the people have this direct gaze, right? They're looking sort of right at the viewer. So we're hoping for that direct connection with somebody who sees the portraits and listens to the interviews.
Yeah. So one of the things I just want to say about Kevin's photographs too, I'm just going to brag about you for half a second here, is that what you're looking at is actually pretty hard to do. It's really hard to get people to just literally kind of have a very relaxed face, look right at you and kind of be themselves. And it requires a bit of skill. And it's one of the things I really love about these portraits is people are really like, it's not the portrait photograph. It's really kind of, he captures who they are. And like Kevin said, it is a very democratizing practice. We really believe that everybody, no matter who you are, has the equal right to have a view of your experience of our government. And so everyone's point of view holds equal weight. And we wanted that to come through. So we also, in addition to photographing everybody the same way, interviewed everybody the same way. We asked everyone the same 4 questions. And I should back up just a minute and say that some of this comes from one of our advisors, Arijit Sen at the University of Wisconsin, who Kevin and I just happened to run into at one of our very first meetings at Amaranth Cafe. And he was, of course, organizing a whole bunch of people in kind of a discussion of urban gardens and this multidisciplinary group of people. And he took the time to come over and talk to us. And eventually he gave us this advice that there's something very powerful about putting together a still image of a person and then having the sound of their voice in your ear. Originally, we had planned that I would write something, some sort of capsule that would, kind of boil down each interview. But Arijit had actually done this in another project called Picturing Milwaukee. And so we really riffed off of that technique and decided to switch over and do audio interviews. So in terms of the interviews, we asked everybody 4 questions, and our core question, really our main question, is what is democracy for you? And the emphasis is really on the for you part of that question. And what we're trying to do is inspire people, our subjects, our audiences, and ourselves to really think about democracy, not as an abstract concept or something that is learned from a history book, but we wanted to understand, like, where does this idea of democracy come into your life? Where is it in your life story? We also asked 3 additional questions, again, trying to get people to think about political issues from a personal standpoint. And those questions were, to what extent are you optimistic about the future of the country? What are the qualities you care about in political leaders? And what are Milwaukee's most pressing issues today? When I interviewed our subjects, I would find, small, quiet spots to get good audio. So the setting was really intimate. And I have to say that the responses really surprised me. These interviews took a lot of energy. People were extremely passionate, occasionally tender, and even tearful at times. I think that was partly because of the state of the world at the time. And of course, as you'll find out, like, this project ended up going through the pandemic and the period of time after George Floyd was murdered as well. But even before that, you heard it in the final clip that we played at the top, when Catherine Gale says, democracy is at risk. You really felt that, and people really were feeling that, and that really came through our interviews. So we had decided to include at least 100 people in our project at this point. By, let's say, early 2020, we had interviewed about 65 people, I want to say, or by around early February. And that's when we started hearing about early reports of COVID, that among things would change the trajectory of our project.
I'm going to play a few of
Just
these.
when I started.
Actually, a few snippets here. So we, the interviews live on our website in full content, and those can be from a minute to, I think, 15 minutes long, edited sort of interviews. But on Instagram, we played 1 minute interviews or shorter. So these are some of those somewhat smaller snippets that you get a feeling of somebody's conversation with us.
I love chaos. I love, when like a bunch of kids mess up in a school play. I love when, the sheep go out of the barn. I love thinking about like a room full of pianos all playing a different song at the same time. we all sort of thrive in ways of chaos, but knowing that there's parameters, like we're good with chaos if we know where the boundaries are. Right now we're in a time where we don't know where the boundaries are, and it's hitting everybody's panic button.
A lot of our parents, they didn't have the opportunities to speak up for themselves because they're too busy focused on trying to make it to the next day. But now it's like, if we don't speak up, we're not going to make it to the next day. So I do feel like change is coming because change is already happening. When do you ever see the youth standing up how they are standing up currently today? I am definitely optimistic about the future of our country because of people like me, because there are youth out here who really see that if we don't do anything, nothing's ever going to change. So there are so many youth just here in the city alone that are doing things to better our future. Now, does that mean by the time we get to our parents' age, will the future be like just automatically better? No, but I definitely think it'll be better than what it is right now because we've seen what happens when we sit back and do nothing.
Am I optimistic about the future of the country? I think as someone that's involved in education and seeing young people at a really important moment in their lives and seeing how passionate they can be, I mean, I think that is something that provides me optimism. And even teaching at an engineering school over the past 5, 6 years, I've seen students that are much more engaged with the world around them than, say, 10 years ago. And they're not your traditional liberal arts students who you might expect to behave in such a way. So these are engineering students. And so when I see their empathy, when I see their potential for taking on new ideas, it does give me some hope.
So as Mary Louise was saying, we had, I can't remember the exact number, but we had interviewed, I think, about 90 people by March when the coronavirus started. And so we paused everything. We had appointments set up with sort of the last set of people that we were going to finish the project with. This is Mary Louise's recorder inside a Ziploc bag with hand sanitizer and instructions. We did several interviews where I would drop off the recorder on somebody's doorstep and they would pick it up. I would make a quick distance snap with my phone and then they would sit at their table talking into Mary Louise's recorder as she talked to them on the phone. And it wasn't an ideal thing, but we managed to do some of these interviews and still meet some of the people that we wanted to meet during the process. Fortunately, these folks, when we started up again in July under pretty strict standards to distance and still communicate with these people, we were able to get them back into a setting that was more appropriate for the structure we had set up originally.
Do you want to talk about George Floyd too?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, and you know the project we had touched on many different communities at that point, and we had talked to a lot of active people in the Black community in the city of Milwaukee. But when George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis and protesting began in Milwaukee, both for coronavirus and for the Black Lives Matter movement, it gave us an opportunity to think more about who else we wanted to include. We certainly already had interviewed people that were important in both of those areas, but in the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, we were able to interview younger activists that were participating and organizing at the time, and we're able to further add that voice, I think, to the project.
Right. So, as Kevin is describing, I think what we started witnessing was, citizenship was sort of playing itself out, right, in front of our eyes during both the pandemic and in these marches for racial justice that were happening around the world and in our hometown. And so we just felt like we had to bring some additional people into the project. We expanded the scope a little bit. We ended up going up to about 117 people. We had healthcare workers that we talked to, for example. And we just had to like kind of rejigger everything. We had planned an exhibit at City Hall that got canceled. The DNC eventually was kind of up in the air and eventually got canceled. So that became this like non-end date. That was our kind of culminating moment that sort of vanished in front of us. And so we decided to extend the project until Election Day to allow for some space for these other things to kind of evolve. And one of the things that happened was we got a call from Adam Carr, who you're looking at right now, who is a journalist and an artist and a community organizer and many other things in Milwaukee. He's the subject of This Is Milwaukee. And he called me one night with an idea for kind of events that we could hold. And before I get to that, I think it'd be nice just for you all to hear Adam's snippet. So maybe we could play that.
Democracy feels like a really tenuous and fragile thing. And maybe it always has been, but I think maybe it feels at risk more than ever. Like, I think that's a thing, like the house I'm sitting in right now, when it was built 100 years ago, people knew every person in all these other houses when they looked out the window. I know maybe like 6, which is, and probably that's above average. So I think that to me, even what is the unit of democracy, I think a lot of it is like knowing the people in your immediate geographical reality, and the loss of that, I think, is massively influencing how we view ourselves within the systems that we're a part of.
So that's Adam. He recorded that before the pandemic. He called me up one night. He had just come back from a bike ride or a run, and he's a journalist, so he was exhausted, up to his eyeballs in news about, COVID rates in Milwaukee and around the world, which restaurants were open and closed. And he really felt like he needed to have deeper conversations about what was at stake in the world at that time with people that he cared about. Some of those people were in our project. So he proposed kind of really informal Zoom gatherings where we'd re-examine the questions in our project with a handful of subjects, usually 3 subjects each time. And then we just would all get together. And while the subject was sort of serious, the gatherings were really informal and kind of nice. They were sort of this like lovely reprieve. It was like, in lieu of seeing people, it was just nice to kind of come together this way. And people brought cocktails and snacks and their dinner and art projects. Or they made a fire, in the backyard. And it was just kind of a very, like I said, informal thing. Our friend Camille Mays, who lost her son to gun violence in Milwaukee and who is kind of unusually committed to the idea of healing, would start each session with her Nepalese singing bowl, which kind of called us to get to attention in a really elegant way. And then we would usually end each event, and we call them This Is Milwaukee Talking, by the way, I should have said that by now, with a very brief, like 5 minutes performance by an artist or a poet. So that was probably kind of the most unexpected, unplanned evolution in our project. Other than that, there are a lot of other ways that our work kind of ultimately did go out into the world. And I think Kevin is going to now talk about distribution.
So the original idea was a main website where people could click on a face and learn about somebody that lives in Milwaukee and hear their voice. And this is the website. It's this is milwaukee.us, and it exists today. There's 117 interviews posted on the website and more information. And to get the word out about the events and the website and all kinds of things, we created a Facebook page and an Instagram feed, which was a nice, Mary Louise often talks about this idea of the internet being sort of this cluttered and challenging place, especially when it comes to maybe political news and those kinds of things. And the Instagram feed, for instance, is pretty, I think it's pretty calming and direct, right? You can click on somebody's face and you just look at somebody for 45 seconds or a minute and hear their voice and hear some thoughts that they have. So I think the formats actually worked pretty well for the content we were creating. But we also had other ideas to try to get the content and these people out into the world. One of which was a newspaper project. Mary Louise has worked in journalism for 30 some years. She worked as the art and architecture critic at the Milwaukee paper for 18 years. I began my photography career working in newspapers, and so we both had sort of connections to the physicality of a newspaper. One of the joys of this project is it is not a straight journalism project. It is not a straight art project. It is a melding of those two things. It's a community project. It's a public project. And so I think in the past, both of us have had limitations on the work we've done. We're working for an institution, a media institution. There's lots of things we would maybe have liked to do, but we couldn't do. And in this project, we could do basically anything we wanted to do. And one of those things was to create this newspaper that we would give away to people around the community.
Right, and I would say, as Kevin said, there is an element of both a celebration of journalism and a critique of journalism kind of embedded in some of the ideas. And so we kind of wanted to own that. And so we made this newspaper-like publication. It's 12 pages, color. It's just like an old-fashioned newspaper, so only it's on slightly better paper. Very designed, doesn't look like an old-fashioned newspaper at all. We produced a version with a Spanish translation in it as well, to serve that community in our city. And we printed them on the presses at my former newspaper, which was great. And they gave us a pretty decent deal. And we distributed these in a number of ways. We distributed them through the public schools. So they went out to teachers teaching classes, civics-like classes at the high school level. And they also went out to public libraries in the region. We also left a bunch of stacks in places like cafes, community centers, supermarkets, and an art gallery. One in particular, the Portrait Society Gallery, which, in addition to all of this, staged an exhibition of our work where there was a projection, where there was, I think, something like the full project at that point was 7 hours if you ran all of the videos together. And so that was literally like playing in a back room in her gallery for about a month. We also invited 3 artists, and I think this was maybe my favorite part of the project, or the one that just gave me the most joy in all of it. We invited these 3 artists, David Najib Kazir, Zachary Ochoa, and Aisha Valentin, to take 3 old-fashioned newspaper vending machines, which you're looking at here. These used to be out on the street. You put your quarters in, and you get your newspaper. For those of you who have never seen one of these, which is entirely possible. And these artists, we asked them just like paint them in whatever way you want, and just employ your ideas about democracy and make it personal. And so they did that, and we placed these boxes strategically around the city, including one in front of Milwaukee City Hall. And then finally, Kevin and I handed out the newspapers, near polling sites on Election Day 2020. We asked people, and this was Kevin came up with the way that we would approach people. We walked up to people and asked, would you like a free publication about democracy in Milwaukee? And I have to say, the 2 of us were extremely excited to put these publications into people's hands. We felt like it was a gift for getting to the polls, you know? And some people were genuinely delighted and surprised to get it. And we found that people looked at all the faces on the cover. And in a city the size of our city anyway, it's small enough that people were like, hey, I wonder if I know anybody. And so they were kind of looking for people they know. But there were others who were less interested. I think they were suffering under the weight of information overload, election information in particular, and just did not really want to look at another piece of media. So there were some people who were just like, don't want that, thank you very much. And going to the polls was the final act of our project. That was the culminating event. We went to about a dozen polling locations that day. We also still have these newspapers around. We talk about our project, And we have in the works a curriculum based on our project that can be used in schools. But in terms of the active timeline of the project, going out to the polls was sort of the last thing that we did.
Right. And when we delivered, there were some images of us delivering that huge stack of 3,000 newspapers, which is a lot. No, wait, I'm sorry, what was my numbers are wrong.
Way more than that.
Yeah, sorry. But we delivered 8,000 to Milwaukee Public School high schools. And many of those are maybe still under wraps or only we're seeing towards the end of the year because they sat for quite a while the Milwaukee Public Schools was remote only. But this is a lot to read, but we wanted to thank those people that we worked with. You know, one of the great things, this is the largest sort of art project that I've ever worked on, both in time and scope and in human help and bodies. But that was one of the really pleasurable things for me as an artist and a creator was to employ and work with other people in our community. We applied for and received several grants, which allowed us to hire a manager, a project coordinator, who really kept things in order and organized things. And we hired videographers and other people to just sort of assist in what we were doing. And speaking from somebody, a visual artist who usually works by themselves and just sort of does everything that's possible by myself, the idea of putting money into pockets of young artists and to collaborating with them was really one of the big takeaways for me and a really pleasurable thing, and something that I hope to do in the future to organize those kind of things again. But this is a list of people who helped us along the way.
And so you've talked about what you've learned. Are you done with that?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just don't want to interrupt you. So I think what, for me, what I sort of took away from all of this was, for one thing, the power of a really good question. And I feel like I'm still living with the question, what is democracy for you? And I feel like I will be for many years to come. And I also think there's a lot of value in asking a question in a sustained way over time. I mean, as Kevin said, I was a journalist for a long time, and there's just so much emphasis on, the news of today, and then that's forgotten, and you start over the next day and you work on the next story. And this was a way to go deep on a single question, really with others as well, but over time with people. And I think I will take that forward with me. I'm not exactly sure how, but I feel like that was definitely a lesson. And I also think that I learned that it's important to go deeper into what I think I know already, whether it's my hometown, Milwaukee, or the idea of democracy. I mean, these are things it's really easy to think we know because we have learned, and to just question and continue to kind of poke at those things that we think we know. Because I do feel really humbled by what I learned about democracy and what I witnessed about democracy from this project. So that would be kind of another big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we learned about these sort of larger systems too, that we're thinking about and looking at, is that change has to happen on the part of individuals for things to happen in any city or community. And I think this project changed a lot from our initial conversations and our original ideas because of the coronavirus, but because of all kinds of things. We shifted and we pivoted. And that was a learning lesson, I think, and sort of an appropriate one as project leaders, I guess. But Mary Louise, these were her 4 questions that she developed, and I wanted to put this towards the end of our talk, just so you can think about these again and maybe screenshot it or take a picture with your phone, because I think they're appropriate for whatever community you live in and for wherever you are in your life as a young person, as a middle-aged person, as an older person, a community member. Good things to think about in general. And I think we wanted to end with 2 short videos of people who were really terrific subjects in the project. This is John Gerda, who is really the historian of Milwaukee. He is a fascinating individual, but he is literally like the keeper of all the stories of our city. This is his short edited snippet from our project.
One thing that it's always been a real important value to me, Aldo Leopold, talk about the land ethic. And I think there's a social ethic that's very much a part of that as well. What he said was that when we view the land as something to which we belong and not that belongs to us, that's the beginning of wisdom. And that's kind of the way you build a sound relationship with nature. And I think the same thing is true in terms of democracy. If we believe that it's not what we own, but that we belong to society and have a sense of equity, a sense of investment. And I think that is kind of the heart of the democratic ideal. Democracy to me is opportunity to do what you want to do, and not in terms of license, but in terms of meeting your societal obligations in the most creative way possible.
And then this is Portia Cobb, who's an artist, professor, poet. She's many, many things in the city, kind of a real treasure of Milwaukee.
I was the biggest Bob Marley fan. When I worked in radio and I had a reggae show, I was the biggest Bob Marley fan ever. And I heard his son today reflecting on his life. And he said that his father was about peace. I think that the interviewer said, well, how does that reflect today? What would he say about today? And he says, well, there are a lot more good people than there are bad, but we hear mostly about the bad. But he says, and sometimes the good people that we just lose. But there are many more good people than there are bad. The future depends on us being able to balance, to observe our own minds, to develop this level of respect for everybody.
So that's our portion of the talk. We're happy to take questions too, and thank you again for allowing us to visit with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. That was brilliant. Thank you for sharing. If you just would stop sharing the screen, then we can get everyone's faces back on the screen. If you could all give a round of applause, albeit virtual or in real life. That was a brilliant, brilliant keynote speech there. We're going to use the chat function or the raise hand function for questions, just like we did yesterday. I'm happy to run through them. Once you've been selected for your question, if you could just say your name, where you're from, and then shoot your question. So get those hands up. We have got Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I live in Iowa City, Iowa. And I just want to start off by saying I really enjoyed this presentation, and I think that the project is really cool. And my question is that I enjoyed how you guys interviewed like an array of people of different ages and cultures and backgrounds. I was wondering if you guys noticed any like patterns based on like the groups of people that you asked questions to, like if younger people kind of strayed in a certain direction with their answers, or older people, or certain people from different like races or ethnicities.
You want me to take that one?
Sure.
Okay. We did, and there are a couple things that sort of surfaced for us. One is that the problems in Milwaukee are glaringly obvious to everyone. Like there was almost no one who answered the question about what are Milwaukee's most pressing issues without referencing that we are segregated, that we have issues with racism or some version of that. No matter who you were or what your political background or point of view was, that really was almost universal. And that might sort of seem like an obvious thing in Milwaukee, but it was striking nonetheless. I will say, and I don't know that Kevin would agree with this, but something that I thought a lot about after this is that the idea of optimism was something that I feel like I kind of had to push people a little bit. You know, I would ask folks, are you optimistic about the future of the country? And that was also something that people across the board, younger, older, from various different political positions, felt almost an obligation to say they were optimistic, almost like it would be un-American to suggest otherwise. And when you pushed a little further, I found that you kind of cracked open what people were really thinking. That people had a lot of fear, had a lot of concern, had a lot of emotion around the future of the country. I will say that young people were felt more agency and power, maybe would be the right word. I don't know, Kevin, if you think this is true, but I certainly felt better after talking to the younger people in this project. And I think if we had any regret, is that there weren't more of them in it, because they really taught us a lot. And really, I think, felt like, no, we got this. Like we get it. We understand how serious the things are in the world, and we are on the case, And so that was a distinction from older people who I think would be more circumspect and maybe have seen more, right? Like they have more reason perhaps to be skeptical, but who struggled with their reactions a little bit. Kevin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the young people that we interviewed, maybe as opposed to 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, sort of understood more about how things could get done, right? They I think, knew pathways and new processes in a way that young people maybe hadn't in the past. And, as a segue to that, I just received an email 2 days ago from Naisha Stone, who's a young African-American journalist who you heard from a video clip from today. And she reached out to me to say, can you please introduce me to Howard Fuller? And Howard is a person that's worked for a long time in education in Milwaukee on many sides of the educational public and private school fence, but a kind of a fascinating, knowledgeable person. And so she reached out for that introduction. And I feel like through the project, people are coming to know other people in our community. I mean, one of the things that I should have mentioned at the end was, again, this was the beginning of this process was like how will people see Milwaukee? But I think in the end, it's a lot about how will Milwaukeeans see other Milwaukeeans. So I feel like the resource as it lives on in this website is really for us to look at each other.
Yeah.
Brilliant. We've got a next question from Jake.
Hi, I'm also from Iowa City. Thanks for sharing your messages, by the way. That was really interesting. I was gonna ask, are you thinking about doing like another issue, or are you, like kind of expanding the project? And also, I don't know, this is just something that came to my mind. I think it would be like a really cool TED Talk to have. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but you can give me your thoughts on that.
I would be deathly afraid to do a TED Talk, I think. I'm a little afraid to be here today, so I think that would be really frightening. But, I mean, I think I can only speak for myself, but I think this project took a lot out of us. It was really long and pretty intensive. And I'm not sure if I'd be, wanting to do more. But the thing about everything we're talking about today, I mean, this is Milwaukee, but it could be called This is Iowa City, and you could do it too, Jake, right? I think it's asking questions of a community, right, and meeting your neighbors, and so there's nothing at all inherent about what we did that is tied to our city, tied to ourselves or our backgrounds. I mean, it's basically something that could be done in lots of places, right, or in the spirit of.
Yeah.
So that's what I would hope for the legacy of this is maybe not more creation by us, but maybe more inspiration and creation by other people.
Yeah, we often talk about how even in Milwaukee, like the hashtag "This is Milwaukee" existed before we started our project, and it will exist after our project. So we're kind of coming into the stream and contributing to a shared understanding of our city. And like we said with a regent and who's picturing Milwaukee, like we totally borrowed his methodology and consider it very like open source, like anyone can take it and run with it. And for what it's worth, anyone who would like a copy of the newspaper or to talk to us, we certainly get in touch with us through the website, we'd certainly be happy to chat with you about that. I will say that, it was super hard, this project. And at the very end, when Kevin and I were like a little edgy and a little tired, he said a thing. He's like, we're going to have to do this again. And I forget what it was, like 20 years. Like, we're going to have to do this, go back to these people and see what happened. And kind of ask the questions again at another time. And we both, like, it made our heads kind of explode off our bodies to think about it. But that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And the link to the website and the Instagram is in the chat as well. So do go check that out, guys. It's a great website. Next is Jalen.
Hello, more from Brookfield, Brookfield, Wisconsin. And my question to you guys is, when you were interviewing people in Milwaukee, what do they define as segregation? Did they have any examples? Was it primarily black and white?
I'm not exactly, we had a hard time with your audio.
Yeah.
Do you?
Why don't you type your question in the chat, Jalen? It just cut out there. We'll wait for that to come through. We'll go with Brianna's question next, whilst Jalen writes his question in the chat, and then we can answer that for you after Jalen.
All right. Hello, my name is Brianna. I'm from Wisconsin. And I was wondering, how has your experience having gained so many unique perspectives within the project changed your personal perspectives of the subject you tried to capture, and just life, how it's changed your lives?
One of the things, we ended up featuring 117 people, which is a lot of people. But one of the takeaways is we could be doing this now. We could have been doing this for the last year and a half. We could be doing this for the next 10 years. And I think we would still be finding those people, because I think that's one of my takeaways, is that we met really interesting, compelling, good people from all sides of the political fence, all ethnicities, and I mean, we met this great diverse group of people, and we could still be meeting those people every day, right? Like I think it gave me hope to know that there are so many fantastic people, and that we're just like scratching the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, to be very candid, I was having a hard time with Milwaukee in some ways. I've lived in Milwaukee for about 20 years. My partner is here. Been thinking a lot about, do I want to live in this city for the rest of my life? And there are things about it I love, and there are things about it, including the power structure and the leadership in it, that I find really challenging. And this was a way for me to kind of just lean into the city that I know I care about, and to be reminded of, the ways that democracy happens away from those power centers. Like, it's very easy to think that democracy is politics, and that politics happens in, places like Capitol Hill and City Hall. And while a lot of power does exist there, and we do need to pay attention to those things, like, I really feel like I've come away with this notion, this real portrait of a place where people who are doing very small things, by the way they're running their businesses, the way they're running their restaurant, the way that they are engaging with their students, the way they're engaging with their friends, the dinner conversations that they're happening, that democracy really does happen in those small private spaces. And it's just a reminder to me that that's where I need to live my democracy too. Like, I need to take that part of the practice of democracy in my life seriously.
Going to read out Jalen's question now, and then we'll follow with questions from Katie and Susanna, and then we'll have to wrap things up here. But Jalen asked, when you interviewed the people from Milwaukee, what did they define as segregation? Was it primarily black and white?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen, I think you said you lived in Brookfield, I think is what I heard at the beginning, which is suburban Milwaukee, for the rest of you listening. I think, and Mary Louise maybe can speak more to our subject's our subjects' responses, but in Milwaukee in general, it is a largely black and white segregation issue. There is a large Latino population in Milwaukee, which is also maybe concentrated in the southern part of the city. But that problem does exist in Milwaukee. The black and white segregation, the physical segregation in the city is pretty extreme. I mean, it is extreme, and it's notably bad, even for other large cities in the upper Midwest.
Yeah, it's often defined as what's called hyper segregation. It's very physical. It's very much something you can literally see in the urban landscape when you go from one part of the city to another. And so I would say to that specific question, Jalen, like when I asked folks, what's the most important or the most pressing issue, that it is that very specific kind of segregation that was most often referenced. However, what I would say too is that there are, within our project, we really tried very hard to think about a lot of forms of difference that, including political difference, geographic difference, of which, and these are subjects that came up in our conversations as well, so there are, people from all sides of the political spectrum. There are people who live in the suburbs. There are people who have language barriers. There are a lot of different forms of divide, which is, I think, kind of related to the idea of segregation that did come up in our conversations as well.
Katie, go with your question.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm from England, and I have had bad connection, so you might have already answered this, but I wanted to know whether there was a motive behind doing the photos and the videos in black and white, and because is it for impact or I don't know. Yeah, I just wondered if you had thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there is this idea of impact. I think to some degree, at least as a photographer, when I look at black and white pictures, there might be more of a serious nature to them in general. Documentary, like sort of traditional black and white documentary photography. But I think it is this idea of neutralizing, right? I really want, I love this type of portrait photography. It's as simple as it can get. There's nothing about what I'm doing that I don't know. I don't see a lot of artistry in it. I think it's very straightforward, documenting a person and what they look like. And I think that's the equity in the approach is it's sort of its power, right? And when you see a face next to another face, and you see those differences, and you see the shape of somebody's face, the way their hair is shaped or something, and you're not thinking about necessarily a red shirt or a blue scarf or something like that. I think it's as simple as it can be when we're looking at people's faces. So the democratization or the equity involved in that approach is kind of an important thing.
And I would just add that it also, because of where a lot of people encounter these little snippets within their Instagram feed, right? So you're scrolling, and it's like, that is a full color world, right? And so you're just like, we wanted to stop people with something that clearly stood out as different from all of that.
Yeah, cool. No, I feel like when we were watching it on the slide, you definitely listen. I was just listening to what they were saying because you're not distracted by an earring or anything. But yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Final question from Susanna.
Hi, I'm Susanna. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and my question is, what is some advice that you'd give to people who want to reconnect with their community but find that they get stuck with people that they disagree with?
Well, one thing I would say, and this is something I learned from my very first journalism job, when my job was to call people who had just had a family member die and ask them to talk to me and tell me their story. And I was petrified about doing this because I just felt like these are people who are not going to want to talk to me for anything. They've just suffered a terrible loss. And what I learned then, and what I think I've always continued to learn throughout my career as a journalist is do not underestimate people's desire to tell their story. And I think genuine curiosity about a person, asking questions that are human, that are not necessarily about the things that are super hard, but starting with like their experience as a human, is a really good place to start. And just don't be surprised by people's willingness to talk to you. And also, it's okay if people say no. That will happen, and it's not the end of the world. Just go to somebody else.
And the ability to listen. I think Mary Louise's role as a journalist is to write and to capture people's thoughts, but before that happens, you have to be able to listen to somebody and to really hear what they're saying is a two-way street, and conversation and journalism and real life and humanness all together.
Thank you.
Great final question. Thank you once again, both of you, for sharing and putting up with these extremely hard questions. We have got a fair few more coming in, but we're short on time. What's the best way for our delegates to contact you guys? Are you able to put something in the chat, or is it through the website?
Go ahead, Mary Louise, I'm sorry.
I'm happy to share an email address if you would like.
Yeah, I'm going to as well, because through the website, we're getting much less emails. So I'll share mine as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. And as a reminder, we're doing something along the lines of this as our capstone project this week through the Flickr. So don't forget to engage with that. You're able to put your own pictures up and comment on them, just like the two speakers have today. Before we wrap things up today, I'm going to pass over to Greg, who has an announcement.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Greg. You can call me Greg or Triple G. I am hosting our talent show on Wednesday night, this coming Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Central Time. You can figure out how it's located in your time. The talent show is normally a fun part of the week. So if you have talents, I've talked to you already who some of you play instruments. I've even talked to one person in my group who juggles. And if you're willing to do that, or if you sing or want to perform your forensics or speech and debate piece, you can do all of that as part of the talent show on Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Normally, when we do the seminar in person, there are talent show auditions. There's not going to be that this year. The only thing that I do ask, as always, is remember when you're here, you're representing your Rotary Club and your state and all of that. So you're a delegate. So please keep it family appropriate. And last year we even had someone virtually who had their cat do a talent, and that was pretty cool. And 2 years ago I got pies thrown in my face when it was in person, but that will never happen again. So anyway, the talent show's on Wednesday night, and please come at 5 p.m. It's on the website. The Zoom link will be there, and please come and perform. And the chat will also be open, so you can encourage other people while they're performing. So if you can't perform, come and be a part of it. So thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Greg. That wraps things up for this session. Another round of applause for our two great breakout speakers. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And thank you for your work around Milwaukee. Moving on to later today, we've got a daily discussion, which is, do cities still matter? This isn't mandatory, but we do invite you all to come and contribute and listen to what others have to share as well, especially after we've all had the input of our great speakers today. And then tomorrow, things kick off with another daily discussion, which is Cities for All. And that starts at 9:30 a.m. And the discussion after this is at 4 p.m. But do go outside, have some water. Other drinks are available, but I recommend water and some food. And thanks again to both our speakers.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.